My name is Ben Travis. I'm this year's marketing track captain, as well as marketing manager at Bonusly here in Boulder. And I also want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors. So this year's sponsors, many thanks to Techstars, Honey, Name.com, Downtown Boulder Partnership, and CU for their sponsorship of Boulder Startup Week. Without them, it wouldn't be possible. And now I'd like to hand things over to Sarah. So Sarah Brown, if you haven't heard of her before, she is a very prominent member of the Boulder marketing community, and also just read her book. So Power to the Startup People. Be sure to check that out. And Sarah, take it away.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Ben, and welcome everyone who joined us. Thrilled to have everyone here, and really excited to dive right in with panelists. We're going to do a Q&A that I'll moderate, and then please feel free to chat in the box to panelists, and we will answer questions at the end. So very excited to dive in, and I'll start by introducing our panelists. We have Tori Stitt, who is now marketing manager at Help Atlassian Health. Congratulations, Tori.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Rachel Beisel, who is CMO of Cable Labs. We have Simone Johnson, who is project manager at Future Coalition. And I'm the head of marketing at Intricately, and also co-founder of Flatiron's LGBTQ Tech Meetup. So welcome, Tori, Rachel, and Simone. Great to have you here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So could each of you please give us a brief background, share who you are, what your company does, and what your current role is? Maybe we'll start with Rachel.
All right, I think I've already established myself as the crazy cat lady whenever people were coming on, but I'm Rachel Beisel. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Cable Labs. Cable Labs is an innovation R&D lab focused on the global network communications industry. If you're on the bike path in Boulder heading out of town, you'll see it there on your left right after B. McCaslin Hill. I've worked in marketing and sales for more than 15 years. It's scary to say that. And in various nonprofits, technology startups to Fortune 500 companies, as well as my own clients. I also found my own consulting firm in 2015 called Lead Out Sales. It's focused on B2B marketing, fractional CMO strategy for different companies, primarily technology startups. And also included training and some project-based execution. When not working, you'll find me enjoying wine or playing with my 3 adopted cats. You may see them walk in back here, or on a mountain bike somewhere in Colorado Springs.
Fantastic. And Simone, welcome. Love to have you go next.
Yeah, thank you. So as you mentioned, I'm the project manager for an organization called Future Coalition, and Future Coalition heads up another coalition called the U.S. Climate Strike Coalition. And so if you are familiar with the mass mobilization strikes that took place in September all across the world, Future Coalition is the organization behind those strikes. I help project manage those climate strikes, now turned digital. And prior to getting involved in the project management space, I was a marketer. I worked at Cable Labs with Rachel and several other really awesome startups in kind of the software consulting scene in Boulder. But a lot of my background is in youth organizing, mobilization, climate justice, and climate change. I've founded an organization called the International Indigenous Youth Council, and we work to mobilize young people, particularly Native and POC youth around the globe through civic engagement and organizing youth to change their communities. So happy to be here with you guys.
Amazing. And Tori, last but not least.
Thank you. So I'm Tori. I don't even know how to start. I'm from the East Coast originally, and I started in finance and kind of gotten into non-traditional marketing that way, kind of in the back door. I started in sales and then came out to Colorado because I love the mountains, and also because I was super interested in expanding my understanding and learning of marketing and also entrepreneurship, and got my MBA at CU. And then from there, I actually met Rachel and was able to work at Cable Labs as well for a little bit as an intern. And she was actually a great connection and introduced me to a lot of wonderful people. And eventually I found my way to Halp, which is a small startup in Boulder. And it's an IT ticketing system embedded within Slack. And as of 2 days ago, we were Halp by itself, and now we were recently purchased by Atlassian, and I am now a digital marketing manager there. And a bit about me in the background, I'm a big skier, and yeah, I've been doing marketing for a while. Love it.
Fantastic. So I love hearing each of you share about your backgrounds, and I think it's hopefully helpful for folks who are with us today, because each of us have come to where we are in our careers in different paths. So I'd love to hear how you've approached growing your startup career. Has your career growth been intentional? How much has happened organically? And I'm happy to go popcorn style if you sort of want to just sort of answer. And yeah, I would love to hear from folks how you got to be where you are, and how much of that was you driving it, and how much do you think was other factors?
I'll unmute.
We all unmute. That's so funny.
Yeah.
I can go since I went first the last time, but I actually got started more in the agency space, working with a lot of startups, but more than 15 years ago, I didn't realize what a startup was. I didn't even know it was called a startup. So I ended up working in a startup. It was an apparel startup in the outdoor industry. And I stumbled into that way actually through the bicycles. So my personal passion was what led me to being able to get more involved in the startup scene. So worked in that particular startup. And then even when I moved out to Colorado, I'm originally from Tennessee. And when I moved out to Colorado, I started a cycling team, and one of the people who was on my cycling team, she happened to run a startup in Boulder called Quick Left, and then she ended up hiring me in there and took a chance on me to help me transition from the outdoor industry into the technology industry. So it's kind of, mine was more trusting my passion that led me into a lot of the careers that I've been able to have, at least in the startup ecosystem.
Very cool.
I can go next. I'll popcorn next. So mine wasn't necessarily intentional. I knew I wanted to kind of get out of finance and out of New York City when I was there. And so I decided when I came to CU that I was really curious and wanted to dive more into entrepreneurship on top of marketing. And from there, I just honestly met a lot of really great people and mentors who kind of led me down this path of understanding what I really liked. And it was not very intentional, I would say. It was kind of like happenstance to a degree. But when I started actually working for Rachel, she created a great problem, or she was trying to solve a great problem, and ended up being the same problem that the Halp, the company I work for now, is actually solving. So it's just something really cool, and you don't always choose your path, but it sometimes just comes to you in some ways.
So for me, I attended the University of Colorado in Boulder, and I was a marketing major. And so for me, it was kind of just, that's what I pursued for school. And so that's the path I took with pursuing a few internships when I first started my career. And actually, one of my first jobs was with a Techstars organization a Techstars member organization called QuotaDeck. And so I worked and interned with them. And I was really interested in kind of the smaller scale organizations that were bootstrappy and, close, tight teams that were working on these really creative projects. And so that's kind of how I got involved in marketing, and I continued to pursue several different roles within that space. And I'm actually not a marketer anymore. I'm a project manager. And so I've kind of transitioned recently out of marketing and into more of the project management space. But I think throughout the past few years, I've just learned for myself what I really love is to work with teams who really feel supported and encouraged. And so I saw project management as kind of being an avenue to continue to be in that type of a role. And so that's kind of where I am today.
And I think we all have someone in common who introduced us all, which was Pete, who was a professor at CU. So that's how I met you both as well. So
Yes.
yeah, academia.
Very cool. So it sounds like a through line for all three of you is people, so that you met people who were working on problems that you cared about, and then they helped you find the roles. From there, I'm curious, what's progression been like? Have you sought promotions? Have you sought sort of higher levels of responsibility? I know, Simone, you have pivoted a bit from marketer to another area of passion. I'm curious to hear how you've approached sort of where you got your start and then getting to where you are now.
Yeah. I mean, for a really long time, and Rachel was my boss, so she can attest to this, like my whole idea was like, oh, I'm going to climb this corporate ladder and I'm going to become a director of marketing, and then I'm going to be a CMO, and I'm going to get as high up as I can, and I'm going to be the boss. And that was the mentality I had for a really long time, especially being a young person new to working. Was just, oh well, that's the path you take, and that's what you do to be successful. And I think I've done a lot of self-reflection over the past few years about what success actually means to me. When I made the choice to shift into project management, it was obviously a shift into kind of it wasn't like a promotion necessarily. I wasn't going up the ladder. And for me, I just made the decision that what was most important to me was to build on skills actually outside of marketing that I had always kind of felt like, I wonder what that would be like. Like I love marketing, but I also love these other areas that I haven't had an opportunity to really be involved in. And so for me, I think the approach has always been just making sure that I feel like I'm in a space where I'm learning new skills, being really challenged, and diversifying my skill set. I've always been somebody who really loves to be the jack of all trades, to like have my foot in every single piece of the puzzle, which is why I think I actually really love project management. And yeah, I think, just any way that I can do that within my career and kind of touch all aspects and learn all of these new things, that to me feels like success. And so I would say I'm not particularly interested anymore in climbing the ladder or eventually becoming a corporate officer necessarily. And we'll see what happens. I don't know. Things could change tomorrow, next year.
I'll build off of that. I for sure have very similar feelings as well as Simone. Definitely traditionally was going in, oh, I'll build and go up the ladder and eventually get to that place. And I've sort of bounced around from industry to industry. And my pivot was going back to school and kind of just reevaluating where I wanted to be and what I wanted to be doing. And technology was very interesting to me. So that's kind of why I pivoted into technology from finance. And I felt like I had that bridge to be able to do it with the degree, and also meet a lot of really great, intelligent people while I was at it. But at the end of the day, I mean, I don't even know where I'm going to go from here, because in a lot of ways we just got bought, and things can change in 6 months from now, and I could be pivoting into a different role within a bigger company. I definitely think there's something about that small vibe of a startup that really drives a lot of people. And like Simone said, having your hands in all different levels and understanding everything that's going on was always something that intrigued me. So I'm going to continue down the path of seeing where I can go marketing wise in technology. Right now I'm doing a lot of digital stuff. So I really love doing that, and I'm excited to where I continue to evolve at some point.
I kind of, I guess, went the inverse, maybe. I never really thought about climbing the ladder. My purpose was actually, and this sounds pretty, I guess, very pragmatic, but it was to get out of student loan debt. So I had to make some choices that I allowed that to motivate a lot of the different choices that I made. And early on in my career, I actually did pursue what I was passionate about. I got to work in the outdoor industry. I love bicycles, and got to be a part of that, and also worked in nonprofits and things that I cared about. So I kind of started that way, and then I was like, I really need to figure out how to get out of my student loan debt. So then that's when I started thinking, okay, what, not necessarily in terms of promotion from a title perspective, whereas I was financially motivated to do that and was able to get out of debt. And doing that, started my own company and worked 2 jobs at once to do it. But I think of some of the things that I've done to help in growing that is obviously volunteering. So like starting out doing a lot of giving back in the community, like with Boulder Startup Weeks, and that helped me build my network and meeting a lot of different people who could either help me from either building my own client base to future potential clients of day job or future potential career opportunities. And also it allowed me to find some allies that I have and sponsors, if you will. And I think those are some questions that we may discuss later, but finding, I won't say mentorship, it was certainly two-way street. So to get people, like even just asking for a pay raise internally at a job, it's finding someone who is your ally inside of a company as well as someone outside as well too, that you can bounce some ideas off of.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we will definitely talk about sponsorship and mentorship. I'd love to dig into something that Tori, you touched upon a bit, which is startup stage. And I know in Colorado, we have a lot of early stage startups, companies that are right out of Techstars, other accelerators, and they're early. And what advice would any of you give to someone who's trying to level up or break into early stage startups versus later stage startups or even larger companies? And I know each of you have worked at larger companies, Tori, especially now that you're, I guess, a few days into working at a larger company, but I know your previous experience. So yeah, I would love to hear how each of you think about that early stage versus later stage.
I would say an early stage, if you're lucky enough to get in and you're really there, get ready to roll up your sleeves and really dig in, because that's exactly what your CEO is going to expect of you, and that's what they're going to want from you, and that's what they're going to want you to power through and do. I personally, in the beginning stage, made like a checklist of all the things you got to do in terms of marketing, but you never know where it's going to evolve to. There's so many different paths you can take a company at the get-go. It's going to be a balance of what your ideas come up with and what you feel like you can execute on, and combined with what the team expectation and the product expectation is too, especially in tech. And then I would say in the long run, I mean, it's a lot more thinking of content, thinking of things in the long run that somebody's going to search for to find you. In speaking towards SaaS specifically, what are people going to want to read? Who is your market and your demographic, and how to really hone in on that audience is really, I think, as you get towards the later end of being the beginning of startup, is where you start to really find the meat and bones. And last but not least, celebrate the small wins and the big ones, because they're going to be going by quickly. And if you do get lucky enough to get into positions where you do get acquired, it definitely changes life for sure.
Great. Simone, any thoughts on larger companies, smaller startups from your journey?
I mean, for me, something that's coming up is just like so many times it can actually feel really hard to find like a competent person to do a solid job. And I think of this saying that my boss has, she has it hanging in our office, and it says, chop wood, carry water. And whether it's a later stage startup or an early stage startup, no matter where you work, I think like that message to me speaks volumes of how to be scrappy and how to keep pushing and keep with progress and keep getting the job done while you're looking at this big picture and you're trying to move towards a common shared goal where maybe you can't see the end of the road or the end of the tunnel. Just that idea of constantly like being scrappy and pushing forward and biting off chunks of whatever that project or that task is at hand, chop wood, carry water. That to me really makes for a really competent and excellent like person being a part of a team, doing their part, even in the face of like maybe not knowing what is at the end of the road. And with startups and with, you know, projects that are new, sometimes it's really hard to see what that thing at the end of the road is truly going to be, because it's always changing and it's constantly shifting, and you're making new decisions like at the tip of the, you know, every single turn something can change. And so just having that kind of a mindset and mentality when you go into projects, I think helps Other people on your team feel really supported and encouraged, and it allows for you to feel like you're keeping pace even when you might not be able to see what the outcome is.
Just of some differences that I've seen, like in being one of the first few hires at a startup that eventually grows and then does get acquired, of just some things along my journey that I noticed of how different it was when you're 5-10 people versus when you get to 50, then you get to 100. It's really interesting to see, can you maintain whatever your essence was or your culture was, and how does it evolve? I think those are some really interesting observations going through, and then even seeing when you get into a much larger company, and it's really I actually really struggled with feeling purpose and passion, and like, why am I even here whenever everyone is pushing this same rock up this hill when you're in a startup and you feel like you maybe are a bit more emotionally attached. So that's just my personal experience with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So to segue a bit, what's a mistake or something maybe that you learned from along your startup marketing journey?
I have a funny one that's not necessarily super serious that can maybe make everyone laugh. At how we do this great thing on Fridays, we typically do lunches, not so much anymore, which is sad. But then we do appreciations and in the ditches. And in the ditches is like kind of honoring and owning and like something you may have not like been perfect at for the week. And I had one of a really good in the ditch one week, and it was due to like something of like not being aware. And on Reddit, I left the comments on a ad, and man, did they not take any pity on me whatsoever. And I had to close the ad. So things like that happen in startup life. And sometimes I think the best thing you can do is just truly like own it and be like, yeah, I did this thing, and we're in a phase where we're just growing and experimenting. And I think it's really also important to also know and hopefully have managers or people who you're working with who accept the fact that like no one is perfect and no one is gonna, do everything to the best ability, especially in the beginning. You hope that they can, but also celebrating and having fun with like the things you fail at and be like, cool, that didn't work. Let's keep moving and try this next thing.
I have a lesson learned that's kind of front of mind because it happened recently, but with the International Indigenous Youth Council, we're a pretty small organization. We were founded 3 years ago, so we're really young, and we're a youth-led organization. So everyone is young in that sense as well. And myself and my partner are really interested in growing the organization quicker than we have been growing the past 3 years. So about 6 months ago, we expanded our core team, and we brought on a few additional folks to be a part of the core team. And we quickly realized that it was not a fit. It was equivalent to like a toxic relationship where you stay in the relationship even though you are seeing like red flag after red flag, and you are ignoring them, and you are saying, well, maybe we can make this work. And we tried to make it work for 6 months, and we just actually this week made the choice to disband the core team. And it was a really tough decision, and it felt particularly kind of crappy given the fact that we're in a pandemic and this affects people and their livelihoods. And it was a really big lesson just to learn how important it is to have a core team where you feel super strong in your relationships with each other, because that's what sets up success. That's what sets up a foundation for your organization. And if it's not a fit, address it early, address it, be forward about it, and move on.
I learned so much more from mistakes than when getting something right. I think the more you work, the more you realize what you don't know. I think of a few mistakes I've made was certainly pushing, I think, people to see things through my point of view a lot of times, and the lens that you carry is kind of that aha moment for me. Like the lens that I looked at when I in startup was growth. growth, growth, growth. And that might not be the marketing goal of the organization. So it's what's really been thought-provoking to me and going through everything is seeing what is the lens with which somebody else is coming to this conversation with. And that can help you understand whether or not you're achieving your goals or not. So I think that that's something that's really important. And I took some of that actually away, learned that from Simone in terms of communication around that. So I think that that's really important, the lens that you bring, but also do you have the ability to see the lens through somebody else's viewpoint?
Yeah, cool. Before we go on to the next question, I'll share one mistake or something I've learned along my journey, which is sometimes if you're really good at something, you can end up getting stuck there at a startup, especially as you grow and you scale, where, you know, I was doing our customer marketing earlier in my career, and I'm a total introvert. So going around, flying to different companies and going to their offices and interviewing them was just so draining for me, but I was good at it and I was rewarded for it. And it took me a while to realize that I had to very proactively get myself out of that. So I think sometimes, you know, if you're a Jack or Jill or person of all trades, and then you start to specialize, you have to be careful that you're specializing in something that you actually want to do. And it sounds like, Simone, maybe you had that kind of a moment where you realized, you know, I want to change my role in marketing. I want to do project management instead. Was that something that happened for you, or was it more organic? Like,
yeah, well, so actually when I worked at Cable Labs on the marketing team, I did do a lot of project management. We really, really needed a project manager, and we weren't going to get one. And so there were a lot of times where there were those types of tasks and responsibilities that I was responsible for. And Rachel was my boss. She's been an amazing boss for the majority of my career. And I always felt like I could go to her and tell her if, you know, like, I'm doing this and I hate it and I don't want to do it anymore. Like, please help us figure out how to shift. So for me, I felt really grateful to be in a space where I could, you know, if something wasn't right, Rachel was really accommodating, and she listened and she figured out ways to shift our team so that everyone felt like they were doing something that they were really passionate about and that they were good at. And I think I'm really passionate about the climate justice space. And so for me, a lot of my pivot into project management also had to do with like moving a little bit out of technology and going into more of the activism work that I was actually doing as a side hustle for so many years. And I wanted that to be a really, really prominent element of my life and in my work. And so that's really what inspired me to make the shift.
Awesome. You know, another point too is startup marketing encompasses so many different types of companies. We've just talked about a lot of technology companies, but I know some of you work for different startups technically that are in different spaces. So in terms of, let's say, advice for anyone who's aspiring to be a startup marketing leader or a startup marketing practitioner, what advice would you have for folks who want to keep growing in whatever startup marketing industry they're in?
I've learned more. My title is a marketer, but I have learned more and been able to bring more by trying to learn other areas of the business. So not just functional horizontal areas of a business, but also the industry and even adjacent industries. I think it's really important to have analogous thinking when you bring that in. That makes you solve problems in different and creative and unique ways. And if you're in marketing, you're not just trying to replicate what all these other people do or your competitors. You're trying to do something that's different. And the only way you're going to be able to do something that's different is you have to kind of get out of the marketing space to be able to do that. So I think it's really important to try to learn a lot of different aspects from operations, development, if it is technology, supply chain, whatever it is. And most of the time, if you're at a startup, you're pretty lucky that you can have the opportunity to do that because everyone's pretty strapped for time and dollars. So of course they're going to want your help. So I think it's important, also important to remember to protect your personal time because it is really easy to really overwork yourself in that. But if you enjoy learning, I think it's an excellent opportunity in being in a startup to do that.
I would say, like, especially when you're early on in your career, for me, I would jump at every single opportunity that was handed to me. Like, if somebody asked me to speak, if somebody asked me to take on a new project or a task, I really tried to like move out of that idea. I mean, because a lot of times you can like get excited about these new things that are asked of you, and you can have a little bit of like fear of like, oh, I don't know if I'm really ready for this, or like I'm afraid to publicly speak, or whatever it is. And so I've really tried to take the approach that like every choice I make in my life, I want to be acting from a place of like curiosity and opportunity, and not acting out of fear. And so saying yes, even when you don't maybe know quite how you're going to do it, but knowing that you're going to figure it out and that you'll be guided and trusted along the way, has been really huge for me. And I think, and to Rachel's point, make sure that you balance that element of work-life balance and don't overstretch yourself. But when, if and when you can, always say yes.
I agree so much with both what you said. So it's hard to like find something not to add to, but I would say, I mean, startup life is just kind of nutty to begin with, especially if you're at the beginning, and you're really like the only one on the team doing stuff. I definitely agree. Learn other positions, learn other areas. I wouldn't continue to have your scope only just be in marketing. It's lovely to see, and something I actually do personally is when I see an idea that someone else is creative marketing wise to do, I have like a board that I post it on. So I'll take like a screenshot. I'll be like, this is awesome. I want to like do something very creative. And so when I come up blank on an idea or something like that, I'll go to this board and I'll be like, okay. And I categorize it as well. So, you know, let's see, like this industry, they did this. That's really cool. Maybe we could do something that's similar to it, but not exactly mimic what they're doing. But I think it's always a great idea to pull from other wonderful, amazing marketers. But, you know, put a different spin on it. Don't make it like just exactly what they are doing, because like Rachel said, you know, you don't want to be mimicking everybody, and you want to kind of carve your own route, and really show yourself and your product of how amazing it can be.
Yes, yes. And by the way, I'm seeing the chat starting to get some more activity. Feel free to post your questions. We're going to take a few more minutes of our internal Q&A, and then we'll open it up. So glad to hear folks are finding this hopefully useful. So let's talk about sponsorship and mentorship. Rachel, you spoke about it a little bit earlier, and I love that the three of you have this beautiful relationship with each other in that you're all connected and have worked in some form together, or, you know, in the same company. So in terms of your sponsorship, your mentorship, both that you've received and also how you approach giving it to others, would love to hear, your take on it. And Rachel, if you wouldn't mind starting, since you kicked it off.
And you also have a wonderful snippet about this in your book as well. Sponsorship versus mentorship. For those who aren't familiar, mentorship in its simplest form is kind of like a one-way. You ask for advice. I could give you advice, but it's not a two-way street. I'm not expecting anything. And I don't have skin in the game. Whereas sponsorship, you actively put yourself on the line for that person, for their personal advancement, and you will get something in return in that. And you shouldn't do it just because you're going to get something in return, but it's wonderful to help bring other people up, and it will ultimately help you down the road for sure. So that was kind of a big aha moment. I went to a women's conference for the Colorado Technology Association, and we were told to read this book, which is Forget a Mentor, Find a Sponsor. So if you haven't read it, you can get it on Audible. Listen to it at 1.5x speed, and you can get through it in probably 2 or 3 days, but it's really good, packed full of information, and a lot of examples too about it. I think I would definitely not be where I am without sponsorship. I pride myself on saying I've done a lot of things by myself, but truly nobody's ever done anything by themselves. And I've had people, like, for example, one of the most humiliating moments of my life when I was interviewing for a publicly traded company for one of their executive positions. And I was way out of my league. I said yes, and I was shooting for the moon, and reading through their S1. And I had no idea, like, the guidance for this publicly traded company, and coming from startups and how to negotiate options and all this stuff. So he helped me go through it and figure out what my ask was. Now, clearly, I guess they knew either my age or my experience level or whatever it was that they could see on LinkedIn. But in going through that process, they literally laughed in my face when I told them what I wanted from a salary perspective and shares. And but he like helped me in that, coaching me through and say, you are actually worth that. And thank goodness that they did that, because now you don't have to waste your time on a company who's going to make you feel that way. And it made me feel like I was in a really bad shame spiral around that. But not only did he help me make sure that I understood my worth, that I was worth my worth, and that it was worth waiting. And I got much better opportunities from that down the road. And that was someone who is external, who happens to be a business owner as well. So that was super valuable for me. I personally really enjoy giving back to other people and seeing them succeed, because it will ultimately help me down the road. And I know not just because it will help me, but I think what rising tides, all ships float. We should be a lot more focused on the surplus that is around us instead of having a scarcity mindset.
I love that.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think I've actually not read the book, so I'm definitely going to read that now. But I would say, Rachel, you're definitely a great sponsor in a lot of ways, because I've looked to you for advice, and you've definitely helped me helped to introduce me to other people. And I think that finding folks that you have commonalities in and not being afraid to ask questions and being really honest with them and being really honest with yourself is kind of the best thing that you could do. And ask questions. Like, if you don't know, I mean, Google's a great source, so start there. But if you have a group of people, friends or other folks that you know, or even LinkedIn people that you don't know, like, feel free to reach out and ask questions, because most of the time people are super comfortable giving out free advice. And if you don't want to ask someone directly, ask on Reddit, because, you know, you can be anonymous. And so you can learn just so much from more people. And I actually been mentoring since I was really young. And giving back to youth and just being supportive of other people. And selfishly, I find great fulfillment in doing things like that and trying to help people and bring them up, like Rachel said. And I think it's just so important. If you can find people, do it, and don't be afraid. And sometimes your mentors aren't necessarily like older than you, like they can be younger than you too. I learned a lot from a 17-year-old engineer this summer. So trust me, like, you never know who's going to teach you something that you didn't know before.
That's cool.
Rachel noted this a little bit ago, but the idea that, like, as a mentor, many times the mentee-mentor relationship is truly like goes both ways. You know, sometimes we have this idea that, like, just because you're a mentor, that the mentee is getting more value out of the relationship than the mentor. And oftentimes that's not true. And I think an approach to relationships that really touches on this point, and just all relationships in general, is when you can cultivate a relationship that is co-committed rather than codependent. And for me, when I first got introduced to this idea of like being in a co-committed relationship with somebody, which is when like you're both able to show up for each other in a really authentic way without sacrificing yourself. It was when Rachel actually suggested that I go to leadership training called Leadership Camp, which Sue Hilbroner from the Boulder community has started. She's the founder of Merge Lane. I mean, this training like completely transformed my entire life and the entire way that I approach relationships. And so I think for me, it's always been about how to cultivate relationships, whether that's in my personal relationships or my work relationships. How can I cultivate a relationship that's based on co-commitment and not codependency? And it's so hard, man. Like, I started a women's circle a month ago, and we're approaching these ways of like showing up for each other. And man, when you think about like healing or going into these really authentic relationships, you're like, we all went into it being like, oh my God, this is going to be so dope. Like, we're going to feel so inspired and it's going to be awesome. And it is, but it's like such hard work. And it shows the places that you haven't, like addressed your own insecurities or your own ego. And so I think just like, if you have the capacity to go there, and if you have a growth mindset, looking for other people who are also interested in exploring those types of relationships has been completely transformative for my entire life.
And on that, I have just a very specific brief example, but Pete, who is responsible, that individual who introduced a lot of us, who's a professor at CU, he did this concept called a dilemma day, where I wouldn't necessarily say it's sponsors or mentors. I consider him a sponsor of mine, but with also our peers, and we each brought a dilemma, we each brought a problem, and we spent an entire Saturday indoors to talk about each of our respective problem areas, to have an open discussion around it. And it is hard. And my dilemma that I brought was I hate all of this work travel. I was having to travel almost every week, and personally, it's not something that I enjoy doing. I was sacrificing my health. I didn't feel like I could say no. And literally every person in there, and I don't know if this is, I don't want to say like a woman or a man thing, but everyone was a man. And I said, I can't do this anymore. And they say, well, don't, just say no. And like, I did not, like, my mind was blown how easy that was to do that. And so I was like, I can't say no. And like, why not? I would say no. Yeah, me too. I'm like, oh, well, maybe I should just say no, and started doing that. And granted, everyone probably wishes they could travel right now, but it was a blessing in disguise at the time, to be able to just say no and realize that it's okay to say no. So I wouldn't have been able to do that without sponsorship and also peers as a part of that.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'm loving this through line of creating healthy boundaries in your startup marketing role or your startup career, and figuring out people who will support you and sponsor you and help guide you as you're making those healthy decisions when possible. And as our last question before we open it up for Q&A from the audience, we're going through a particularly challenging time for many folks. The startup industry has different parts of it that have been more or less impacted. Some of us are having acquisitions or fundraising events, while we see other companies, particularly in sectors that are vulnerable right now, like travel or others, really struggling. And a lot of people are, I think, excited about Boulder Startup Week, but also excited to meet and network for their next opportunity. So I'm wondering, for each of you, how have you approached finding your next opportunity, and any advice you have for folks who are maybe in that position right now where they're looking for what they can do to get involved and maybe find their next role?
I can start. I think there's some great resources in Boulder by themselves. But if you're really interested in this particular area or in industry or anything like that, I would say find some communities. There's a ton of like Slack communities right now, and you can find job postings. I know I actually manage ours, and so like I always post stuff in there, and I'm always trying to find things for other people to like resonate and will help them. So definitely I would say try to cultivate something and look into, there's tons of marketing communities, and you can throw your ideas, especially if you don't have anyone out there. Someone's asking, what are good links for communities? Honestly, just Google like amazing marketing communities, or, marketing SaaS communities. I'm part of one that's called CR Growth Hack, and it's a growth marketing community, and people you can drop a note saying like, hey, this is what I'm interested in, or an idea or something that you think you could do, and go from there. Sometimes it's nice just to have other people to talk to.
Awesome. I'll just say in the chat, feel free to share your resources with everyone, and Rachel in particular. That's an incredible article that she's put together. And Ben runs the Boulder Startup Marketing Meetup. I think that's the name. And I think we're cross-listed this event. So shout out to Ben who runs that, and that's on meetup.com. And feel free to post things in the chat if you have other resources. Did anyone else in our panelist group want to share resources that are top of mind?
Simone, you recently went through a transition. And how did you find that during this time?
Yeah, I mean, so I moved on to this new role in February, and I was with my organization for a month, and then the pandemic hit, and for our organization, everything is about community. Like for the Climate Strike Coalition, it's all about mass mobilizing in numbers, and how can you rally all of these people in the streets. And so we were completely like everything changed when the pandemic hit and when the stay-at-home orders really started to get super serious. I was nervous about the shift because I obviously didn't feel totally like confident in like, oh, I have a secure job with this company I've been with for a long time. Like, it wasn't that type of a situation. I'm this new person, but luckily our organization is very much in the space of support and relationships. And so we made a quick pivot to transition as much of the work that we did in the streets digitally, which this isn't going to work for all communities. And there are a lot of frontline communities that are just like so impacted, and it's not as easy as just being like, oh, just switch to digital, like not everything about our lives can move to the digital space. But for us, we did it. We were supposed to have mass mobilization strikes on Earth Day for 3 consecutive days. And we switched to a 72-hour live stream that took place across the course of those 3 days. We streamed to over 5 million viewers throughout those 3 days. And it was a really beautiful, inspiring, just awesome live stream that we were able to present. It was a lot of hard work. We organized it in like 5 weeks, but we had a group of amazing people who knew how to leverage the strengths of those on our team and how to leverage the strengths of those outside of the team that we didn't have the right, in-house resources for. And I just, all I can say was I felt lucky to be a part of an organization that really was able to shift quickly and really make sure that everybody was taken care of and that we were still able to do the work that we wanted to do. So that doesn't really answer the question or really provide resources, but yeah.
Also, if you, and I know this also depends on what your personal financial situation is, but in recessions comes innovation. So if that is something that we're embarking on, a lot of people start companies during that time. And Andreessen Horowitz just recently wrote a blog post around verticalization in markets and like actually trying to find a job, and how LinkedIn is like old enough to drive and is kind of outdated in terms of trying to figure out how to network and how to find things, like build what you see or what you don't see that is needed. And I know it just depends on your personal financial situations as well too, but a lot of great innovation can come from this. A lot of people are experiencing problems. Maybe now is the time to start to build some solutions.
I would also say, like, don't, if you can be in a financial situation to like afford things, there's tons of online stuff you can find, and like sharpen your skills, add a new skill set. I mean, I'll be totally honest. I one time got fired from working at a real estate company, and it was possibly one of the best things that ever happened to me. And I started learning how to design, like I learned the Adobe Suite. And so like, that was something I did like in trying to find another job. So don't be afraid to like step out of your box and like really want to learn something. There's tons, I mean, you could become an expert in anything marketing wise, and the world is kind of your oyster.
Very cool. Tori, I totally love that you were in real estate. That just makes me smile. And I have seen your Photoshop skills and Adobe skills firsthand. Very cool. So we have a question from Kat, and Kat asks, you all touched on the importance of work-life balance. This is definitely something I've struggled with in all of my marketing roles, and I know it can be really tough in the startup space. So Kat is asking, what is your advice for maintaining healthy work-life balance? Good question.
It's a lot of work. 15 years in, I still haven't figured it out, and have to have total strangers as well as friends tell me that, no, you need to have better boundaries. And even in like my personal therapy sessions, talking about boundary setting, and it's a really challenging skill set to develop. And it's something that you can't just assume you're good once you've said no once or drawn that boundary. It's something that you have to continue working on, and kind of like what Simone was saying about how it's a lot of work. I can't remember within the context of what you were talking about, personal growth, but same thing. And I don't know, I think knowing your personality type too sometimes can help, and especially, or even knowing the personality types of others on your team. So we went through a lot of stuff with like the Enneagram and figuring out like how do I come to situations and what do I bring and how do I go in times of stress, and recognizing that actual physical feeling in your body to try to force yourself to have a reset. Where I hold stress is my chest. And like I can physically feel it tighten up when I start to feel those types of emotions. And it takes practice to feel that. And I know it kind of sounds woo-woo, but I mean, it's a physical feeling that you feel. And when you can recognize that and stop and start to probe and ask questions around that and be okay with that feeling, it starts to, at least that's like, I think some of the first steps in that. And also just recognizing it's a lot of work.
I think too, if it's something that doesn't come naturally to you, to be like, oh, hey, let me take this time for myself. Maybe start by making a small commitment to yourself. So like for me, I base my value off of my productivity. Like I know that. And I tell people, like, I'm always the one who's like, you don't have, if you're not productive, like you're still amazing. And I say it to all of my friends, but like, that is how I base my value. And knowing that doesn't make the self-care element of like going about my day any easier. Like there are often times where I take time for myself, and the whole time that I'm exercising in the middle of the day, I feel super guilty, or I feel like, oh my God, I should be at my laptop right now, or there's probably something that I'm not doing. But I made the commitment to myself that I'm going to exercise every day. And more often than not, I hold that commitment true. And so maybe there's just something small that you can do, or, like you don't check email until 11, and, maybe that's not feasible for you within your own work life. But what I've found is more often than not, the like requirements that we think are required by our employer are actually just things that we're putting on ourselves. And so if you can figure out a way to go about your life that feels authentic to you, allows you to have that space for yourself, and you still get shit done, like that's the ultimate goal. But you can start small and make small commitments if it's challenging.
Well, I think we have time for one more question. Tori, did you want to get something in there, or should we move on to the next question? Happy to.
We can move on to the next question because we only have a couple of minutes.
Okay, awesome. We can circle back. So Lena is asking, do you think it's necessary to specialize to advance into your startup career, or is there more value in being a generalist?
I'll take that one. That's a question I ask myself, I think, all the time. There's always, this is going to be bad. My dad tells me all the time, like, you should specialize and like go super focused into one area. And it's hard because I think if you're a marketer and you get some super passionate about a project or something you're working on, you want to know everything and you kind of want to get your hands dirty and everything. And it makes it a little harder. I think if you like being involved in everything, you want to be more of a generalist. But at the end of the day, is it better to do like a lot of things like really okay-ish, or is it okay to do a lot, like one thing really, really well? So I do think it is important to find an area that you really like. I'm not the best content writer. I will always say that, but I try really hard, and sometimes it comes out great, sometimes it doesn't. But I think at the end of the day, you can pivot and find something else, and especially in a startup community and a startup life, usually you're wearing a lot of hats. So if you don't like the one thing you're working on, be honest with yourself and tell other people as well, and tell your teammates that it's not something you love to do.
I struggled with that too. At first, I thought I had to specialize early on, and I don't want to specialize. I've got a lot of friends who are scientists, who are PhDs, who know a lot about this one thing. I would rather have several friends who are PhDs and have fulfilling conversations around that. That's something that I like. I even have in my LinkedIn bio, I'm a polymath. I've just recently learned the word multi-potentialite. I think a lot of really good things come from being a generalist. I do think being a specialist in some areas is incredibly important. I want my heart surgeon to be a specialist. But I think in a startup career, depending upon what it is, I think you can learn a lot of different things, and that can bring a lot of value to not only your startup, but yourself. And I'll share a TED Talk on what a multi-potentialite is.
I love it. I'm loving the resources in the chat. Simone, is there anything else you wanted to share on this topic?
I mean, my advice is just do what's going to make you feel like you have purpose and happiness within your career, because for some people, they really enjoy doing a very specific thing within their field, and that's what makes them thrive. And for other people, it's having your hands in all of these different pots. Like one direction is not going to be, it's not going to be like, oh, you specialize, and then that means that you're going to be set up for success. Like what's most important is for you to think about what makes you happy, what makes you thrive, and allows you to show up and be your best self every day. And whether that's specializing in something or touching a bunch of different areas, like if you're jiving and like thriving in that, you will succeed.
Awesome. Well, we are right at time. I wish we could talk for another hour, but I want to let everyone get back to their days and awesome Startup Week events that they're going to. Big thank you to Ben for organizing the marketing track and wanting to host our event. And thank you so much to Simone, Tori, and Rachel. Such a thrill and pleasure to learn from you. And thank you so much to everyone who joined us. Just really excited to be able to do this year, and wishing everyone stay safe and sane and sound during this time.
Awesome. And is there a good way for folks to follow up? I know we've had a lot of really great questions, but either through LinkedIn or Twitter or otherwise, if folks want to continue that conversation, what would you recommend?
I'm active on Twitter, Seb Marketing, or find me on LinkedIn. Always happy to chat.
Yeah, I put my Twitter handle in as well. So Miss bikes a lot. Miss doesn't bike.
You can find me mostly on LinkedIn, and I'll put my email in there too.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks so much, everyone. And Ben, thanks again. And hope everyone has a great Boulder Startup Week.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Sarah.
Cheers.
Thank you.